Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications.
The sound of the jackhammer echoed down Maple Grove Street like a gunshot, causing Rachel Cooper to drop her bags in the middle of the sidewalk. Her eyes, still tired from the 2-week business trip, couldn't process the scene in front of her, where her beloved 1887 Victorian house should have been with its iconic century-old magnolia tree. There was only a pile of rubble and a yellow backhoe. No, no, no! Rachel ran towards the rubble, her heels sinking into the mud left by the previous night's rain. The house that had belonged to her grandmother, where she had spent every summer of her childhood in Millbrook, Connecticut, was reduced to a mountain of broken wood and broken bricks. "Ma'am, this is a demolition site. I need to ask you to step aside." A man in an orange hard hat approached, gesturing for her to step back. "Move back, this is my house," Rachel shouted, her hands shaking as she pulled her cell phone out of her pocket. "Who authorized this? I demand to speak to the person in charge." The order came from the Pine Valley Homeowners Association, the man replied, consulting a clipboard. "Signed by the president, Ms. Victoria Blackwell." Rachel felt her blood run cold in her veins. Pine Valley was the gated community across the street, known for its ostentatious mansions and strict rules. Her house wasn't even part of that association. "Marcus, I need you now." Rachel frantically typed a message to her childhood friend and lawyer. Within minutes, a black BMW pulled up abruptly next to the curb. Marcus Bennett, an African-American man in his 40s wearing an impeccable suit, got out of the car with an expression of shock. "My God, Rachel, what happened here?" While Rachel was explaining the situation, a white Lexus SUV pulled up across the street. A blonde woman wearing a pink tweed outfit and high heels crossed the street with determined steps. You must be Miss Cooper," she said with an artificial smile. "Victoria Blackwell, president of the Pine Valley HOA. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but your property was in violation of several building codes and posed a risk to our community." Marcus stepped forward, his professional tone masking his anger. "Ms. Blackwell, this property does not belong in your jurisdiction. The demolition was completely illegal." Victoria laughed softly. "Oh, but you're wrong. I have all the documents here showing that this property was incorporated into our association 3 months ago." She held out a folder. Rachel flipped through the papers, her hands shaking. "That's impossible. I never signed anything." "I'm going to need copies of all these documents," said Marcus, already photographing each page with his cell phone. "And I suggest you stop any demolition activity immediately. You're about to face a very serious lawsuit." As the tension escalated on Maple Grove Street, a man watched the scene from inside a discreet Ford Fusion parked on the corner. Joseph Murphy, a former Hartford police detective, now a private investigator, was making notes on his pad. Something about the situation didn't smell right, and he had a hunch that he was about to uncover a much bigger scam. Over the next few weeks, Rachel took up residence in a local hotel, refusing to leave Millbrook as she fought for justice. Joseph Murphy discovered that Victoria Blackwell had connections with a developer who was planning to build a luxury shopping center in the area. Several other historic properties had received similar notices of violation. During a night of searching through public records, Murphy found something disturbing. "Rachel, look at this," he said, showing his laptop. The signature on the incorporation documents was forged, and it's not the first time Ms. Blackwell has done this. Rachel felt a mixture of anger and relief. "So we have proof." "Even better," replied Murphy. "I found a pattern. In the last 5 years, she's used similar tactics in 3 other historic neighborhoods, always following the same method: forged documents, false allegations of violations, sudden demolitions." Marcus Bennett prepared a comprehensive lawsuit, including not only illegal demolition, but also fraud, falsification of documents, and emotional damage. The news spread quickly through the small town of Millbrook, and other owners began to come forward with similar stories. The case attracted local media attention when a former HOA employee came to Murphy with a bombshell revelation: Victoria Blackwell had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to expand the Pine Valley territory with a view to a future $1 million sale to developers. Rachel spent her evenings at the hotel going through old family photos taken on the porch of the Victorian house. The century-old magnolia tree, now destroyed, had been planted by her great-grandmother on her wedding day. Every floorboard, every decorative stained glass window carried a story that Victoria Blackwell had erased with a single forged signature. It's not just about the house, Rachel told Murphy during one of their meetings. It's about preserving history, stopping people like Victoria from destroying the character of our city out of greed. As the sun set over the rubble of the Maple Grove house, Rachel, Marcus, and Murphy planned their next move. The battle was just beginning, and they were determined to expose the truth, not just for personal justice, but to protect the historic heart of Millbrook from the clutches of corporate greed disguised as community preservation. Daniel Murphy was not a man who believed in coincidences. After 2 decades working as a detective on corporate corruption cases, he knew that every lie left a trail. Sitting in his makeshift office at the Millbrook, and he studied the documents forged by Victoria Blackwell, while Rachel Cooper paced nervously around the room. "Look at this," Murphy pointed to the screen of his laptop. In the last 3 years, Pine Valley HOA has expanded its territory by 47%. Each expansion coincides with an urban revitalization project proposed by the Apex Development Corporation. Rachel leaned over the detective's shoulder, her eyes roaming over the financial spreadsheets. "And what does that mean?" "It means that your house wasn't the first, and it certainly won't be the last." Murphy opened a folder full of photographs. "I found a pattern. The HOA first marks target properties with petty violations. Then the intimidation begins, the absurd fines. When the owners resist, discovered documents magically prove that the property has always belonged to their jurisdiction." Marcus Bennett entered the room carrying a stack of court cases. "I just left the forum. In the last 18 months, Victoria has sued 7 historic owners. All the cases were dismissed when the houses were mysteriously demolished before the hearings." "How does she get away with that?" Rachel asked, her voice shaking with anger. "Money and connections," Murphy replied, getting up to stretch his legs. "Apex Development is just the tip of the iceberg. I found out that Victoria has a brother on the city council and a sister in the urban planning department." Marcus' cell phone vibrated. It was a text message from an anonymous source looking for Catherine Martinez, former secretary of Pine Valley HOA, fired 6 months ago. Murphy was already reaching for his coat. "I'm going after this Catherine. Rachel, I need you to do something important. Organize a meeting with other affected homeowners. The more testimonies we get, the stronger our case will be." As Murphy drove through town in his Ford Fusion, he reflected on how Millbrook was changing. The old Victorian and colonial houses that gave the town its charm were gradually being replaced by luxury condominiums and shopping centers. It was as if the very soul of the town was being sold off meter by meter. Catherine Martinez lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of Millbrook. When Murphy knocked on her door, he found a middle-aged Hispanic woman with tired eyes and a defensive posture. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Daniel Murphy, private investigator. I'm investigating Victoria Blackwell and the Pine Valley HOA." Victoria's name made Catherine turn pale. "I can't talk about that. I signed a confidentiality agreement. An agreement that's probably as legal as the documents Victoria forged," Murphy argued softly. "Ms. Martinez, a woman lost her family home. A historic house that survived 2 world wars was demolished in a matter of hours." Catherine hesitated for a moment before opening the door wider. "Come in, but I can't promise I'll help." Over the next 2 hours, Catherine revealed a much bigger scheme than Murphy had imagined. Victoria wasn't just expanding the HOA's territory. She was systematically eliminating historic properties to create a commercial corridor that would connect Millbrook to Hartford. "She has a list," Catherine explained, her hands shaking as she poured coffee. 23 properties marked for forced acquisition. Mrs. Cooper's house was only the first phase. Murphy discreetly photographed the list Catherine showed him. "Why were you fired?" I questioned her methods, especially after I found out she was using false documents to put pressure on the most vulnerable homeowners first, the elderly, low-income families, people without the resources to fight back legally. Back at the hotel, Murphy found Rachel organizing an impromptu meeting with other owners in the event hall. 15 people shared eerily similar stories: unexplained rape notices, constant harassment, veiled threats. "My family has been in that house since 1902, said Harold Peterson, a 78-year-old man. "Last week I received a notice saying that my garden violated Pine Valley's aesthetic code. My house is 3 blocks from the condominium. Marcus, who was furiously taking notes, interrupted. Gentlemen, we have enough evidence for a class action suit, but we need to act fast. Murphy watched the meeting with growing interest. Victoria had made a crucial mistake. Her greed had made her aim too high too fast. Now her victims were coming together. The detective discreetly left the room and called an old contact at the FBI. Frank Daniel Murphy here. Remember that real estate fraud case you were investigating in Hartford? I think I found your connection in Millbrook. As night fell over Millbrook, Murphy reviewed his notes in the hotel room. The case was turning out to be much bigger than a simple property dispute. It was a complex web of corruption involving local politicians, developers, and an HOA that had become an instrument of institutionalized extortion. Rachel knocked on his door, carrying more coffee. Any progress? More than we expected, Murphy replied, showing Kath on the list. Victoria made the classic mistake of white-collar criminals. She documented everything. Every target property, every bribe, every connection. It's all here. And now Murphy smiled for the first time in days. Now we turn the tables. The discovery of Victoria Blackwell's scheme was growing like a snowball down a steep mountainside. Daniel Murphy had spent the entire morning at the Millbrook Municipal Library going through old property records when he found something that made his heart race. It wasn't just Rachel Cooper's house that was at stake, it was the entire history of the town. Look at this. Murphy showed Rachel and Marcus a yellowed map from 1892. Millbrook's entire historic district has been designated a cultural preservation area. By state law, none of these properties can be demolished without approval from the Historic Preservation Board. Marcus adjusted his glasses, examining the document. This means that the demolition of Rachel's house was doubly illegal. Victoria not only forged HOA documents, she completely ignored preservation legislation. And there's more. Murphy slid another document across the table. Catherine Martinez sent me this last night. It's an email between Victoria and Robert Caldwell, CEO of Apex Development. They're planning a $200 million shopping complex. The project already has prior approval from the city council. Rachel sat down heavily. How is that possible? They don't even own the properties yet. Because they already know they're going to get them, replied Murphy. Victoria's brother on the city council, James Richardson, is rigging the votes. Her sister in the planning department, Patricia Richardson, is approving the zoning changes even before the acquisitions. Marcus' cell phone rang. It was Harold Peterson, one of the affected property owners. I just got an eviction notice. They say my house is condemned because of structural problems. The inspector hasn't even been inside the property. Murphy was already reaching for his coat. I'm going over there. Rachel, keep organizing the owners. Marcus, prepare an emergency injunction. We need to stop any more demolitions. At the Petersons' Victorian home, Murphy found a familiar scene, condemned stickers on the windows and a backhoe parked in the street. Harold, a white-haired man who had spent a lifetime restoring the property, was shaking with anger. My father built this balcony with his own hands in 1945 when he came back from the war, said Harold, his voice breaking. Now they say it's structurally unsound. Murphy photographed every inch of the house, documenting its impeccable state. That's when he noticed something strange. The stamp on the condemnation document had a future date. Mr. Peterson, can I borrow that notice? I promised to return it today. Back in his makeshift office, Murphy compared the document with others Catherine had provided. The pattern was clear. Victoria was predating notices, preparing demolitions even before any actual inspections. Rachel organized an emergency meeting in the community hall of the local church. More than 50 homeowners attended, each with a similar story of harassment and intimidation by the HOA. It's not just about our homes, Rachel told the group. It's about our history, our community. Victoria Blackwell wants to turn Millbrook into just another generic suburb full of department stores. While the meeting was taking place, Murphy received an anonymous phone call. Look for Pine Valley HOA bank records from 2019, especially the transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. The voice was familiar. Catherine, is that you? I can't say anymore. But Victoria doesn't act alone. There are powerful people behind her. Murphy spent the whole night tracing the bank transfers. The pattern was frightening. Every time a property was demolished, a substantial sum was deposited in offshore accounts. Victoria wasn't just expanding territory, she was laundering money through the HOA. The next morning, Marcus got the emergency injunction. We have 72 hours before the judge decides whether to stay the order. We need to gather all the evidence. Rachel, who had barely slept in recent weeks, was studying old photographs of Millbrook. Look at this, she pointed to a photo from 1960. The town used to be known as the Jewel of New England because of its preserved architecture. Now it's turning into an open-air shopping mall. Murphy received another anonymous email, this time with internal documents from Apex Development. My God, he muttered. The project isn't just a shopping mall. They plan to demolish the entire historic district to build a residential and commercial complex. We're talking billions in development. The battle was no longer just for a house, it was for the soul of an entire city. As the sun set over Millbrook's historic streets, Murphy, Rachel, and Marcus prepared to face not only a corrupt HOA, but an entire system that prioritized profit over preserving history and community. The real war was just beginning, and the next 72 hours would determine not only the fate of Rachel's home, but the future of all of Millbrook. The unexpected phone call came at 3 in the morning. Daniel Murphy answered on the first ring, already expecting bad news. Catherine Martinez was found unconscious in her apartment, informed Frank Bennett, her contact at the FBI. Overdose of medication. She left a letter. Murphy dressed quickly, his mind processing the implications. Catherine was his star witness against Victoria Blackwell and the Pine Valley HOA. As he drove to Millbrook Memorial Hospital, he called Rachel. We need security for the others involved, he said. Victoria is getting desperate. At the hospital, Catherine was stable but sedated. The accidental overdose seemed too suspicious. Murphy met Frank in the hallway, who handed him a sealed envelope. This was in her apartment, addressed to you. Catherine's letter revealed much more than a real estate scam. Apex Development is not just a real estate developer, she wrote. It's a front for money laundering. Victoria and her brothers are just pawns in a much bigger game. Murphy spent the next morning tracing connections. Apex Development had links to shell companies in 5 different states, all following the same pattern: aggressive acquisition of historic properties, controversial demolitions, revitalization, projects that never fully materialized. Rachel organized an impromptu press conference on the steps of the forum. Dozens of affected homeowners shared their stories, including Harold Peterson, who moved everyone by showing photographs of 3 generations of his family on the balcony that Victoria had declared condemned. It's no coincidence that all the houses marked for demolition are on strategic land, Marcus Bennett explained to reporters. They are systematically erasing Millbrook's historic district to build a commercial corridor that will connect 3 states. The revelations attracted national media attention. Murphy received an anonymous call from a former Apex employee. Look up a project called Operation Phoenix. It started in Hartford 5 years ago. The investigation led Murphy to a disturbing pattern. Apex had been revitalizing historic communities throughout New England, always using local HOAs as pressure tools. Properties were purchased for a fraction of their value, demolished, and then sold to shell companies for inflated prices. It's a large-scale money laundering operation, Murphy explained to Rachel and Marcus in his makeshift office. HOAs are used to devalue legitimate properties, which are then bought with dirty money and resold for seemingly legal profits. Rachel studied the documents with growing horror. So my house, all these historic houses, they're just pieces in a much bigger scheme, Murphy added. Victoria and her brothers are local facilitators. The real architects are way above them. The situation became even more tense when Harold Peterson found armed men photographing his property at night. The police were called, but the men had disappeared, leaving only a warning: sell now or suffer the consequences. Murphy hired private security guards to protect the principals involved in the case. They're getting careless, he observed. Fear of exposure is making them make mistakes. A breakthrough came via a repentant Apex accountant. He provided detailed records of suspicious transfers, ghost properties, and bribes to public officials. The scheme involved more than $500 million in questionable transactions. This goes beyond Millbrook, said Frank Bennett during a secret meeting with Murphy. The FBI is investigating similar cases throughout the Northeast. Victoria and her brothers are just the tip of the iceberg. Rachel spent hours cataloging stories of other affected homeowners. Each narrative followed a similar pattern: systematic harassment, arbitrary fines, veiled threats, and finally forced demolitions. The Pine Valley HOA had become an instrument of real estate terror. "We need to expose everything," Rachel insisted, "not just for our homes, but to stop this from happening in other communities." Murphy agreed, but knew they were dealing with dangerous people. "We have to be strategic. One wrong move, and we could lose everything." The tension reached its peak when Victoria Blackwell called an emergency HOA meeting. Murphy infiltrated an informant who recorded the entire session. Victoria, unaware that she was being recorded, inadvertently revealed crucial details about Operation Phoenix and its true objectives. "Millbrook is just the beginning," she told the council members. "When we're done, the entire corridor between Boston and New York will be ours to remodel." The recording was the last straw. Murphy, Rachel, and Marcus prepared a complete dossier, including all the evidence of fraud, coercion, and money laundering. As the sun rose over Millbrook, they knew that the next 24 hours would be decisive. Victoria Blackwell's empire was about to crumble, but like a cornered animal, she could still be extremely dangerous. The real battle for Millbrook's soul was just beginning, and no one knew exactly how much victory would cost. The sun had not yet risen when 3 black FBI SUVs parked silently in Maple Grove. Daniel Murphy watched from his hotel window as agents in bulletproof vests took up strategic positions around the Pine Valley HOA headquarters. The moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. "It's starting," he whispered to Rachel Cooper, who had stayed up all night reviewing documents with Marcus Bennett. Frank Bennett, Murphy's contact at the FBI, was coordinating the operation by radio. "Alpha team in position. Commence in 3, 2, 1. The sound of doors being kicked and echoed through the silent morning. Victoria Richardson, still in her silk robe, was escorted out of her mansion in Pine Valley, the handcuffs gleaming in the early light. Her siblings James and Patricia were arrested simultaneously at their respective homes. 15 arrest warrants being served simultaneously in 3 states, Frank informed Murphy. Operation Phoenix is officially over. But Murphy knew that the real battle was just beginning. The evidence Rachel and Marcus had gathered over the past few weeks hadn't just exposed a money laundering scheme, it revealed a conspiracy that stretched all the way to the highest levels of state government. Catherine Martinez, still recovering in the hospital, had provided the final key detailed records of every HOA transaction over the past 5 years. Every demolition, every property acquired, every bribe paid was meticulously documented in coded spreadsheets. They never imagined that anyone would find out, Catherine told Murphy during her last visit. Victoria was so arrogant that she kept records of everything, thinking she was untouchable. The national media began to arrive in Millbrook. News vans lined the streets of the historic district as the story unfolded. Corrupt HOA exposed billion-dollar money laundering scheme made the headlines. Rachel organized an impromptu press conference on the steps of what was left of her house. Dozens of affected homeowners gathered behind her, each holding a photo of their property before the destruction. Today doesn't just mark the end of a corrupt empire, Rachel declared, her voice steady despite her emotion. It marks the beginning of our fight to restore and preserve Millbrook's history. Murphy discovered that the scheme went far beyond simple real estate greed. Apex Development was funneling money from international cartels through urban revitalization projects. Each historic property demolished was a piece in an elaborate money laundering puzzle. We found connections to politicians in Washington, Frank revealed during a secret meeting. This is going to shake the establishment to its foundation. Marcus Bennett worked tirelessly to ensure that the victims were compensated. A $500 million reparations fund was established, and the first payments began to be processed. Harold Peterson was the first to receive substantial compensation. "It's not about the money," he said, moved. "It's about justice, about preserving our history for generations to come." Millbrook City Council has been completely overhauled. New legislation, dubbed Rachel's Law, was proposed to protect historic properties from predatory acquisitions by HOAs. Victoria Richardson faced the judge with the same arrogance that characterized her, but the evidence was irrefutable. She and her brothers were sentenced to decades in prison for fraud, extortion, and money laundering. "You don't understand," she shouted during her sentencing. "We were bringing progress development, "No, Victoria," Rachel replied calmly from the gallery. "You were destroying the soul of our city for profit." A year after the demolition of Magnolia House, Rachel Cooper was standing on the same spot, but this time with reconstruction plans in hand. The project, funded by compensation and donations from the community, would not only restore her historic home, but establish a museum dedicated to preserving Millbrook's history. Daniel Murphy watched from afar as the first stone of the new foundation was laid. His work in Millbrook was technically complete, but something had changed in him during this investigation. For the first time in his career, he had witnessed not just the fall of a corrupt empire, but the rebirth of a community. Rachel told him during the opening ceremony, "When I came back from that trip and saw my house in ruins, I thought I'd lost everything. But I ended up gaining something much bigger, a cause, a united community, a chance to make a difference." Murphy smiled, watching the residents of Millbrook gather to celebrate not just a legal victory, but the triumph of community spirit over corporate greed. The century-old magnolia tree, which Victoria had ordered destroyed, would be replanted in the center of the new community garden. Like Millbrook itself, its roots proved to be deeper and more resilient than anyone could have imagined. Sometimes, Murphy reflected, putting away his notepad for the last time, you have to lose something precious to find out how valuable it really is. And so, as the sun set over a transformed Millbrook, the town began a new chapter in its history, no longer as a victim of corporate greed, but as a symbol of resistance, preservation, and the enduring power of united community.